ერთი ერთი ორი სამი ერთი ორი სამი
Mr. David Law, General Secretary of the Observatory Magna Carta Universitatum, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of Ilias State University. Thank you very much for joining us today and for making this workshop here at ISU possible. It's a great pleasure for us to host it. The main questions you are trying to answer at these workshops are essential for contemporary universities, which are to meet the interests of global markets and stakeholders on the one hand, and promote the common good and be in the vanguard of society's development on the other. Of course, we can speak about the collective understanding of universities' main missions and responsibilities in the global world with UN Sustainable Development Goals and climate change problems, that is provision of responsible research and innovation activities. As for the university's local or regional role and responsibilities, we should discuss it from different perspectives. For a young or baby university, such as Ilias State, established in post-Soviet Georgia in 2006, one of the main priorities, main goal, of course, together with research and teaching activities, is provision of common space for critical discussions where the leading actors of academia and civil society would have an opportunity to discuss very sensitive issues of our society and make them widely accessible to the public outside the university and not only within its small university professional groups. I mean, impact that university has on society today. Since 2022, I mean, Russia's war in Ukraine and unfolding events in our region have clearly shown us the vital importance of directing all our efforts towards empowering democratic institutions, including higher education institutions in Georgia, in our region, established or reformed amid post-Soviet modernization processes. Ilias State is one of them, and we see its role in a bigger regional, post-Soviet regional context, more precisely in this highly challenging transitional period from the Soviet attitudes, standards, and systems, including educational standards, to the post-Soviet democratic ones. What we see right now, not only on Tbilisi streets, but in the entire country, even in the smallest regional centers, this is a confrontation, this is a fight between old, outdated Soviet authoritarian system and the new post-Soviet democratic one with a, I would say, rather limited experience. Of course, university, I mean, permanent demonstrations and strikes and protests since November 28. Of course, Georgian universities are involved in this highly challenging transitional process, not only demonstrations and protests. But we have to admit that the university as a Western European value, as a Western institution, only has a several years history in our country and region. The first university in Georgia and in the South Caucasus was established in 1918, but after 3 years, it was totally Sovietized and shared the fate of the first Georgian independent republic. Unfortunately, we don't have any earlier university traditions. I mean, in the sense typical for medieval, late medieval periods. The only higher education institution in medieval Georgia, as well as in all buffer countries of Eastern Roman Empire, was a religious academy, not a university. As a result, we acquired from this tradition strong tendencies towards medieval ethno-nationalism, ethnical conflicts, privileged state religious, medieval or political theology tendencies, etc., in contrast to the medieval Western Roman Empire, where university developed and from which the Western society inherited the university-based values such as tolerance, equality, institutional autonomy, academic freedom, human rights, etc., and so on. So given these, what kind of historical preconditions and contemporary challenges we have, it is highly important for us to be involved in contemporary discussions about university responsibilities or missions and roles, not only in terms of academic and research activities, but also considering the impact that university has on society. I do hope with GIGA's active involvement, Observatory Magna Carta Universitatum will have a number of interesting discussions and workshops here at Ilias State University. I wish you a fruitful work today, and thank you very much for this great opportunity to be involved or to be part of these discussions. Thank you once again. And I would like to give the floor to them.
Madam Rector Nino, thank you so much for your warm welcome at what I appreciate is not the easiest time for your country or for your university. And can I thank you also for the strong support which this university has given to the Magna Carta's research project. Invaluable and is continuing today. So thank you very much indeed for that. And could I, to the over 50 people who are joining us online, could I say welcome to you. You are indeed most welcome to join with us this afternoon. Now, some of you will know that in 1988, some 388 people gathered in a square in Bologna to sign for the first time the Magna Carta Universitatum. It was a document drawn up by 7 wise professors, promoted by the University of Bologna and the forerunner of the European University Association. It was produced out of concern for the effects that countries were having on their universities, particularly with regard to limiting autonomy and academic freedom. And hence this document was signed, and it served as a communication to the world from the universities in the world that certain principles were important. Autonomy, academic freedom, research-based learning, and a couple of others were there. That document served for 32 years. And in the run-up to 2018, the Council of the Magna Carta Universitatum was asking itself the question, does it need to be updated? It refers to the forthcoming millennium and so on. And so a rather different group was put together. Yes, there were some professors there, but there was also a student. There were also, let me call them ordinary members of academic staff, and a couple of other people. And they did a worldwide research and looked at the extent to which that Magna Carta was still relevant. And they came to the conclusion that it was, but there was a bit missing. And the bit missing, which had come about over the last 30-odd years, was the need for an explicit statement about how universities served society. And hence, in 2020, we launched Magna Carta 2020. It took nothing away from the 1988 document, and it added to it much more about universities serving society. Now, until about 2018, the Magna Carta Observatory, formed in 2000, had been largely a sort of proclaiming body. Here is this document, please use it. And my predecessors, I think, travelled a lot talking about it, urging people, and so on. But there was a change in Magna Carta running up to 2018 when they said, look, we should do more than just simply proclaim this document. By then, it had been signed by about 700 people, our universities, and you'll be pleased to know that we are just 18 universities away from 1,000. So the signing ceremony in London in November this year could well be a milestone event for Magna Carta. And the decision was reached that we should seek to work more with signatory universities to look at how those principles, those responsibilities are put into practice. And I know that this university will be aware of the Living Values project, which was our first foray into this field, and that is now being used around the world. And our second foray, and the reason why we are here today, is the research project, which has been commissioned by Magna Carta, and that is the subject of our meeting. We invited our signatory universities to apply to be part of the project. We wanted them to look at the ways in which they were serving society, to be reflexive about that, and then work with us to produce some resources that can be shared with the world to help them and help other universities serve society better in accordance with the principles of the Magna Carta Universitatem. The bar was quite high, and from the applications we received, just 6 projects were accepted. We've had 5 of them working with us this morning, and at the end of the presentation this afternoon, we will have presentations from 2 of them sharing with you in detail how far that has gone. But before we do that, I'm going to invite Giga, John, and Chris to come and say more about how this project has been structured to provide context for our friends. Madam Rector, thank you again for the wonderful welcome and the strong support. It is invaluable for us. Thank you.
I'm very thankful to Professor Nino Borghinize and Secretary General David Locke for their masterful introductions to the place, time, and the topic of today's workshop. And it's a great encouragement because it's not easy to speak calmly and academically today when the streets of Tbilisi have been intermittently marked by protests and violence against protests for weeks and months. However, I must also confess that words acquire additional depth when spoken during a crisis. For example, the phrase responsibility of the university has never resonated with me as strongly and authentically as it does now. But setting pathos aside, The first thing that comes to mind when talking about responsibility in the days of our shared globalized culture is the reference, with great power comes great responsibility. And even prime ministers have been quoting Spider-Man lately. And but we should not trust blindly what we share. The history of thought comes in handy here. It tells us that what looks trivial and true, in fact, is not. This concept of responsibility, which associates it with the power one possesses, is an old one belonging to a traditional society and being part of not only of an old European, but also of old non-European semantics. The background understanding of this idea is the following. The responsibility is the function of the position one holds. The responsibility is nothing else but the duty of the powerful. An old Chinese thinker and an old Greek philosopher would agree with each other on that point perfectly well. I think they even would agree with Spider-Man. But if we base our idea of university responsibility on this understanding, then university responsibility cannot be great. Universities are not powerful institutions these days. Yes, they can be quite influential. Sometimes they can even see the results of their influence in most unexpected places as unforeseen outcomes of the long-forgotten actions. But power, not really. Universities nowadays are squeezed hard from different sides under political, economic, and social pressures. And this pressure does not come only from outside. Universities put themselves under pressure due to what sociologists call structural accretion of higher education, a tendency to add up functions and become overly complex and difficult to survey. Responsibility seems one more of these functions added to the university. And let's be frank, there is already a small industry exploiting the topic under different names. Social impact, social mission, social responsibility, civic university, engaged university, and third mission. These are only some of the labels about which articles are being written and in view of which projects are being designed and implemented. If I'm not mistaken, first time these two concepts of university and responsibility were brought together systematically was in the middle of the last century. At least I found the first book written on the subject by a certain M.M. Thomas, a Christian Marxist one of the architects of the global ecumenical movement, under the name The Idea of Responsible University in Asia, published in 1951. And the book was a report of a conference held in Indonesia. And this origin encourages a little bit like a neat division. So as if the West is solely about freedom and autonomy, while the East is exclusively focused on duty and responsibility. But like all divisions, this one is also misleading. One of the major reasons is that this discussion was set into motion by the distinctively modern concept of crisis. This aforementioned conference in Indonesia was actually a response to a well-known book by Walter Moberly, The Crisis in University. I'm sure that our British participants like John Davis and David Locke are familiar with it. It was an influential book, although philosophers hated it. Whatever we think about this book, the fact that this consciousness of university in crisis was in play both in Western Europe and in Asia is an indication that the appearance of the concept of responsibility in relation to the university is not about clash of civilizations at all. It is about outcomes of modernity which cut across those cultural and civilizational lines. Let's turn to the concepts of responsiveness and responsibility around which the current project, Magna Carta Observatory, has been developing, is centered. The concept of response we take for granted as in its everyday understanding. So the everyday understanding of response is that we first exist and then we respond. Irrespective whether you are a person or an institution. But a thorough phenomenological analysis has shown that this is a false picture which misleads us. We exist only as a result of responding to the others and to our environment. The same can be said about the institution to even a greater degree. Institutions can exist only as responses to a need. We start with response and build identity based on that, not vice versa, however counterintuitive this might sound. This is not a conceptual hair splitting. The primacy of responsibility gives us a way to understand, the primacy of responsivity gives us a way to understand responsibility. But before that, let's go into the history of the concept as well. As somebody who is interested in the history of ideas, I was extremely surprised when I discovered that people started to use the language of responsibility only about 150 years ago. This word, which we regard indispensable for our moral vocabulary, became familiar in modern European languages, English, German, French, around the 1850s. Of course, before that time, there was an understanding of somebody being responsible for something. There were different terms for that. But the sense was different. The old paradigm was that if something would go broke, somebody was to be found to blame for it. So this was the old semantics of responsibility. Its temporality was past, its horizon was closed, it was investigative in nature. The new, almost revolutionary sense of the term, which appeared in the 19th century, comes from the understanding of responsibility as, in the first instance, self-responsibility. This understanding is based on the idea of autonomy and implies responsibility for things which one hasn't committed. This is precisely the meaning of the term, which seems to be relevant in this context. So, in a way, I shouldn't be talking about the responsibility of the university today. I should be talking about the self-responsibility of the university. And this self-responsibility is open. Its temporality lies in the future. It does not come from great power, but it comes from the call within itself, which is experienced as a higher instance. I would go so far as to say that only by adding this self, we avoid completely the misunderstanding that speaking about responsibility would entail curtailing one's own autonomy. Responsibility is not a limitation of freedom and autonomy. It is the highest expression of autonomy. Responsibility is the work of reflection on the responses one has always already given, and responses which constitutes one's own identity. In this particular case, the identity of an institution. I think a university lacks an important dimension if it does not possess within itself a space to reflect on its own responsibility. Yes, It will still be a university, will respond to certain challenges, some old, some new, will adapt, produce, educate, but the source of this routine activity would be